We got some testing going on. White-winged cow, what up? Romy Valentino, how you doing? On my sound just came on. Cows coming in on an ad on my screen. Emmanuel, what's up, dude?
What's up, man? How's it going?
It is so good. It is so good. I feel like it's been a little while since we've touched on the last couple episodes of these. How you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I mean, I don't know, has it been that long? No, just maybe a week or two out. Yeah.
Yeah, since we only get to do this once a month, I always look forward to it. I'm really excited for today.
Yeah, no, I'm excited too. I mean, it's been a busy summer for me.
Yeah.
As I know, it's been really busy for you guys.
Well, I'm so impressed every time I talk to you. Like, I'm doing 14 projects right now. I got four.
No, well, I mean, maybe that will be the subject for another thing. How not to burn out.
Seriously, I think that's a fantastic.
Actually, we might touch on that a little bit today with the freelance and in-house thing. So
I think that's a huge one that I would be very interested to.
Oh yeah, I've had a lot of ups and downs, and getting really close to that burnout stage. So what do you do at that point to kind of equalize so you don't actually burn out, and that happens in sports too.
Oh yeah.
You know all about that.
And the cost of burning out is so much more than the cost of the time you get in that stage. When if you just pulled out and rested for a minute, you could rebuild instead of like going for another week or another play or another.
Yeah, but I mean that's the problem. Most people don't really know that
when it's coming,
and me included, because you always think, when you're listening to somebody, you're kind of thinking, okay, well, you can, don't burn out, this, that. Mm-hmm. When it comes to yourself, you're kind of like, no, I'm going to power through. And before you know it, you're burnt out.
Right. Just one last little bit.
Yeah. And it's, there's only so many people that I know that are so smart with these things that they actually know, okay, I'm going to program in a certain time so that I don't burn out. But at that time, I shut my doors, I shut my phone, I shut everything. No, I don't accept jobs. That doesn't really happen to most people, like least of all me.
It's a really tricky thing. I think I would love to maybe we talk some more about that, but maybe that's just an ongoing conversation on how do you.
No, that definitely is an ongoing thing. Yeah.
Cool. What's up in the chat? We got White-Winged Cow. Good morning. Greg Semkov in the house. Hey. Romy says, I am online now. Looking forward to seeing my portfolio review. Right on, Romy. Romy, correct me if I'm wrong. Did we get a look at your portfolio on the last show? And Wander Nowhere says, yes, it did just start. Thanks, White-Winged Cow. And Forrest Lamb says, I am always burnout. Well, Forrest, I think
I don't know. That might not be a good thing.
Right, I think that's within your control. Well, I'm really excited, of course, every week that we get to do this show, and I think this has been the feedback from the audience out there has been so overwhelming online, and to you all who have been sharing the episodes as they come out on YouTube, and telling your other friends to come join us here on the stream when it's live has been really awesome. So. Please keep doing that. We are so fortunate to have E-Man here and sharing all this awesome knowledge with us about how do we become professionals in the spaces that we're trying to grow into, and specifically into concept art. Steve Teeps, hello. And Francesco Art, good morning to you. Dominikus, good morning as well. Yeah, Greg says, trying not to burn myself out right now. It seems to be such a hot topic.
Yeah, maybe we really do need to have just a specific show on that, because there are strategies.
Yeah, for real, and it's so worth the effort. Christo Crawford in the house. What's up, Steve Teeps? Well, this is fantastic. We have so far on this show we have covered just a very broad look at what concept art is. We have talked about concept art in depth in a 2-episode series on how the pipeline works for the movies industry, from the pitch phase to pre-production all the way through VFX. We've talked a bit about networking and the unions on the film side. And today we're gonna dig deeper into the game side, right, man?
Yep.
So let's talk just high up level about the broad stroke differences between the movie side and the video game side. How do you see, or let's start with the similarities and then we can go to the differences.
Well, I mean, similar is, like if you're a concept designer, for games, you're going to have to solve problems. I mean, it's a common factor is solving the problems. The difference is the hierarchy in the structure, and also in terms of like the biggest one of the biggest differences that film it's always usually at a freelance basis, and not sometimes if you get on a show you'll have to go into the studio, but and work there on a short term basis. But in games, it's very common to get a job in the art department, and that's sort of one of the I found the biggest difference. Obviously, the type of art is different because in games it's all sort of pie in the sky, blue sky, whatever they want for that game is fine. But in film, a lot of times you have to be concerned about the set build and whether this is does it look real?
Right.
Can it be believed? Is it believable? So those are some of the sort of big differences. So when you're designing for the two different things, then you have two different set of parameters and constraints. The hierarchy is different, but then it's just a name. Like a production designer versus the art director.
Right.
Things like that. It's just who you call. Like who do you deal with? Production designer deals in film is a production designer, and he gives you all the like your feedback and all that, and he talks to the director. Whereas in games, you talk to the art director, and the art director. But the thing is, in games, is that you have to, instead of a set build for film, you have to worry about gameplay. So gameplay is the key now for games. So is my design, does it give interest for the player to go to a certain place? Things like that.
Yeah.
Versus film, where it's like, well, can this set be built? Is it cool? Is it is it realistic? This is different parameters.
Right, where the director can guide the audience through very specifically in a narrative or in a movie, and then in a video game, the audience has the agency, so they now have to be guided by your set design.
Exactly, and then the game designers and art directors work together to help that along. But obviously, there are phases. Same as film. If you're in sort of a real pre-production phase, then it's a lot more of like give us tone and feel. Give us ideas. I've worked on a lot of games where they say, hey, look, like give us ideas. Like, we want your ideas. Don't worry about anything. Don't worry about gameplay. Just give us something cool so that we can go, yeah, we want to make a game that feels like that. Then, as you get into production, then they'll say, okay, well, what does this level look like? We want the player to be able to go over there. Can you design something, that goes over there,
Yeah.
And so now you have to kind of go, okay, well, what would be cool, of course, within the genre of that game. So those are probably one of the biggest differences. I mean, I think games, it used to be like, oh, yeah, games are more toony, they're more vibrant, colors. But I'm like, there's so many different games and so many kinds of film that it's like they really overlap.
Yeah.
So I don't, right now, there are a lot of games want to be very cinematic. So,
right.
Your portfolio can actually work for both. But talk about that.
Yeah. Before we dive into that, to sort of unpack some of the things you were just saying to make sure that I grasp it and we all grasping it right. Raja in the house says, "What up?" By the way, and Dominique says, "Yo yo." Thanks for joining us, everybody. So we're saying that in the pipeline, there's still that, rather than like pitch and pre-production, when you're dealing with a studio that you're consistently trying to, when production is dealing with the studio on the movie side. Here, it's more of you're creating ideas that they can then take back to the gameplay directors and say, here are some of the ideas created by our concept guys. Let's build some gameplay within this. And then they come back to you and say, okay, we've got gameplay built, but here's what we need. We need a reason for the character to turn left and hide. Can you create, whatever example that is?
Mm-hmm.
And then you were saying that it's very often that you get hired on to the art department in a game project. Would you say that when they're hiring on concept artists, you mean they're staffing them?
Yeah, so this is they'll staff, in their art department, because they usually, a game cycle is like 2 to 4 years. So that's another huge difference.
Right.
The film cycle of like you jump on a show, 4 months is like pretty long already.
Mm.
So, you're talking like if you're going to go to a game studio, like say something like Blizzard, Riot, whatever, you're there for a long time. I mean, you're there for the long haul. So that's one of the huge, huge differences. Do you want to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people do love that. They think, wow, that's super.
Right.
So, that's one of the things you kind of have to think about.
It's interesting when you look at some of these artist credits. If you're looking at a concept artist who's done a ton of movies, they can have a lot more movies than if you look at a concept artist who's worked only in games. And you might say, hey, this guy's been in the business for 15 years and he's only done 4 games.
Yeah, that can happen, and that does happen. Because I was working at Sony, and that game took 3+ years.
Yeah.
And I was, working with another, with ArenaNet, and they, we were doing a project, and they were saying, well, yeah, this one's going to be like a 4-year one.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my god, what? 4 years. I was thinking, like 4 months, okay, 4 years. I honestly didn't know how I felt about that.
Yeah, I can hardly imagine.
To be just tied down for 4 years, and then not being able to show your work, none of that. So yeah.
White Winged Cow says, hey Emmanuel, for studios that are less franchise based, are you more likely to be hired project to project, or will they keep you on even if the studio may be making something totally different for the next game?
So I've worked in some small startup studios, and usually the cycle is still going to take a while. No matter indie actually or smaller studios actually might take even longer because they have less resources. It just depends on the game. But usually, if you build a rapport, you're the art department, they'll want to keep you. I mean, that's what I've felt. It's just that most people grow out of that position. They get to a point where they go, well, do I want something more? Do I want to try something else? That kind of thing. Or do I want to freelance?
Let's talk about the difference between freelancing and staffing from a concept side for games.
So, obviously, we talked about like the in-house stuff, right? So you get benefits. You supposedly have, overtime and hours and all that kind of stuff, and you're hired as a permanent employee. So that would be working in-house. The cool part about in-house is that you get to work with people and you get to learn. So depending on the stage of where you're at in your development as an artist, if you're at the beginning, you may want to go in-house because you can learn from other people. You can learn from the art director.
Right.
You will learn a lot. The other side of it is freelance, which is where I was in house for like the first 10+ years of my career, and then when I went freelance, I really enjoyed that because you have the freedom. So freelance, there's a lot less stability, right? But you don't have to be as tied down. And so those are the two huge things. You have to pay your own insurance and, deal with your own sort of life costs and all that. Time management, tax, all that kind of stuff. It's, when you're at a studio, it's kind of all done for you.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of working on the project, when you're working remote, you will get to do less production art. Because when it comes to production art, they need to keep talking to you, right? They need to say, hey, okay, can you move that to the left, move that to the right? Oh, make it more blue, make it more red, things like that, right? But when you're working with a freelancer, you don't want to keep calling them. Go, can you take it to the right?
Right.
5 minutes later, hey, sorry, take it to the left. Like it's not gonna go like that. So more capacity is like doing the pre-production phase where they say, hey, you know what, we have an idea. Why don't you, come up with something? Then you'll come up with something, and then you can submit it to them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And for you all in the chat, Eman broke down in our very first episode of this show how to be a professional concept artist, which you can see on our YouTube or on our website, or on either of our Facebooks. He broke down a bunch of stories from his time, that tenure, that decade of his beginning career where he was working staff, and told us a ton of really cool stories about the importance of that time and how he was able to rise within the studio that he was in and how he was able to network. So if you haven't seen that episode, be sure you go back and watch that, because we don't have much time with Eman each time we get him on the show. I don't want us to redo stories, but be sure you're going back and watching these episodes if you haven't seen them. And talking about the difference between freelance and being in-house, it feels, quite a bit of a risk move. If you're willing to risk more to be a freelancer, you have to risk booking your own jobs and taking care of your own health insurance, but your day rate increases, right?
So when you're working in-house, your day rate is whatever we don't actually negotiate day rates when you're working in-house.
Right.
I mean, it depends on the place.
Right.
I mean, sometimes it's hourly, mostly it's like how much you make a year.
Right.
On when and for that, you'll negotiate whatever salary you want, and then depending on the studio, there may be bonuses and all that kind of stuff, stock,
Right.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
When you're doing freelance, you have to do a little bit more work in terms of like, well, I got to pay my insurance.
Right.
Right. What can I write off? And they'll usually ask you for a day rate or an hourly rate. Right. So because a lot of these projects aren't going to be like 6 month long projects. They're going to be like, okay, well, we need 3 illustrations.
Right.
Or we contract you for 3 weeks of your time. So then you got to kind of look at, okay, and this is where burnout happens, because a lot of times when you're doing freelance, there's a lot of stacking that happens. Because you may be finishing a 2-week painting, and then you book them for 2 weeks later, but your painting goes long by a week because they may need some changes. Now all of a sudden you have 2 projects. Sometimes these freelance jobs, they want things quicker than you can normally give. So then what happens? So then you may need to charge more to offset that. But it becomes a slippery slope really quickly.
Right.
But the thing is, freelance, you have flexibility, right? You can, if you need, like say, well, every day I need to go physical therapy in the middle of the day, well, you can do that.
Right. Because
but there are ups and downs to it, and you will be in a bubble, in a vacuum. You have no one to talk to.
Yeah. Right, because you're always working from home in that scenario, right?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I've sort of, I've worked in the industry for a while. I've met a lot of people. So, there's a group of us that hang out on Google Hangouts. And if I have a problem that I can't solve, guess what? I'm calling them up and going, hey, guys, what do you think? And then they'll give me their feedback.
That is so cool.
Say, hey, and it gives you a little bit of that. You feel like you're still hanging out with the guys kind of thing. For
sure. I think so many greats who have written books about how to push yourself have talked about that, having a mastermind group or a group of guys that you don't necessarily directly work with, but that are in your field, that you can all get feedback from one another and work together on. I think that's so cool to hear that you have one of those. And
I'm actually reading this from WDC Studios.
Yeah.
This is a good question.
Yeah. Is it better to work for a big AAA and possibly start with less desirable tasks, but you may be exposed to higher caliber peers, or a smaller studio, which you may have the opportunity to do more desirable tasks, but less exposure to artists to learn from.
So I think that's great. I think, you know, I think you have to look at it as the AAA studios will have high caliber, yes, for sure. But also look at the smaller company that may have a really good art director, because that's more one-on-one time. A smaller team means more one-on-one time, but it also means you have to be more of a generalist. I've noticed when you're at a small studio, you have to know more. Now, you know, that kind of, it's a real fine line, because it goes against what not against, but I mean, my opinion is be really good at what you do. Right? I mean, you can't do 5 different things, 5 different Olympic events. You can't be the best in them. You can't get gold in every one of them. No way. So you're going to have to find something you're really good at. But that aside, personally, if I was starting, if you can find a good smaller studio, that's what I would recommend. But you know, that small studio would have to have a really good art director. Right.
Yeah. That's such great specific advice, I think. You know,
I mean, that goes without saying, though. I mean, really good art director, small studio means more time for you and more growth.
We've talked a lot about this of your early stages career and how many different things you did in the beginning to sort of figure out what that thing was for you that was going to be.
So, I mean, as a good example, my first job was at a game studio, startup game studio that had less than 10 people. But one of those people, the part owner, was Ron Cobb, who was a designer of like some of the Aliens hardware. He did Star Wars. I mean, he's, the Abyss. You know, he worked on a lot of the stuff, and he opened his game studio. And I worked with him, and I learned from him. But if it was a huge studio, there's no way I would even be able to talk to him. And, you know, if you're working at a huge studio, like, say, Blizzard, I mean, so, you know, some big studios have a really good culture. So, you know, I can't, you know, because a lot of the big studios like EA, Blizzard, they have teams within teams. So you'll still get a lot of attention. So I'm not saying you won't, but you're still going to have to deal with a more corporate structure versus a small team where, okay, come on, guys, we're all going to lunch and we're going to talk. And, you know, that's what happened in my first job. It was like Ron Cobb was, you know, like Brian Flora was there, you know, super Matt Painter guy, you know, the guy who hired me, Sean Wagstaff, who works at NVIDIA now. You know, we were all just going to lunch at the same time and talking and chatting, and you learn so much from that.
Yeah.
So, you know, to me, it's just, you know, I think it depends on the company. Really, it depends, because some cultures are really, they really want you to be part of, you know, the team. Some cultures are really horrible. I mean, it just depends, you know. I mean, but that's with everything, right?
Right.
So you know, for anybody who's deciding, just make sure who's the person I'm going to work with, and is that person going to be able to, you know, work together well with me? You know, like we have good, nice, you know, similar work styles. B, am I going to be able to learn from him? That's huge, you know, and, you know, obviously C, you know, am I going to be compensated at the right amount? Because, you know, just because you're an independent studio doesn't mean that you should be making a huge salary pay cut. Like, you got to live.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
I think that's such a great hierarchy when trying to figure out how to get hired and what you want out of your life, because it's so easy nowadays with all this information about how careers span, and we talk about them in such short windows. It feels like, oh, you should just skip to the stage that E-Man's at right now. But I think it's so important to know that if you're in your first decade of doing this, there's so many crucial steps in there about building your team and building your lifelong and career-long friendships and partnerships, and how this business is all about people, and the way that you spend time and who you spend your time with becomes some of the most valuable things.
Yeah, you know, most people who actually become, you know, really great artists, you know, you ask them, they always talk about their early days, about who they've met, like just like me, you know, like I'm talking to you about who I met. But everybody has the same story. So I don't think you could really truth of the matter is, I don't think you could really go wrong, right? If you chose a AAA game studio, you're not going to regret it because that's going to be an experience, good or bad. I mean, because we can't just base our life off of all the good stuff without going with some of the bad stuff. And the bad stuff tells you what you don't want to do. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So there's no wrong decision that can be. But if you had to choose, then it would be that those would be some of the criteria I would look at.
The idea that I feel like is so bred into our culture now is this like fear of failure, and fear of like having a public or having a mistake that someone else can see. And I think that's one of the most backwards steps, because I think our failures and those bad experiences and learning the things that we don't want early, failing fast, as we've heard so many of the great studios talk about, is the necessary step to success. And I feel like our fear of taking those kind of risks is cutting us out of getting to
and I feel like, I don't even want to look at failure in a negative way.
Right.
Because it's just, you have to fail.
Yep.
You just have to run into, roadblocks to go, okay, well, I'll learn how to get past that. And so now I'm good.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things where it's a positive thing, not a negative thing.
Yeah.
And I think, no matter what you choose, it's going to be great. But if you had a choice, I think the bigger thing is that which studio is going to allow you to do what you want to do ultimately.
Yeah.
If you ultimately want to do is design like grand environments, then you don't want to take the job that's going to say, well, you're going to do props.
Right.
Right. It's not going to get you where you want to go. But it might be with Blizzard, huge company, right? They say, well, your stuff looks like you could do that, so we're going to hire you. Or the smaller place that says, hey, we really like your environments, studies and stuff like that. That's what we want to hire you for. Like, the most important thing is getting hired to do what you want to do. And don't let the lure of the big place and the nice salary get you to do something you don't want to do, and then 3 years later you're going, God damn, I don't want to do any more props. Like, can I just get back to doing what I like to do? So really look at that part. That's important.
Yeah,
I think.
This is all such awesome advice. I want to make sure though that I'm keeping up with our chat, because there's some great questions in here, and I want to make sure. Thank you all for commenting in the chat and for being such a lively chat with us week to week. Please, if you have questions, drop them in here. We're super excited to do that. We want to make sure that everyone here has a voice. White Winged Cow says, I'm sorry to keep asking questions. Don't be sorry. Please keep asking questions.
That's what this is for.
Yeah, literally. And thank you for it, White Winged. If you are in-house, are you a full employee with benefits, or are you a contract employee, or does it depend? So I think we kind of touched on this a little bit. When you
nowadays, though, I have to, I have to be honest. Nowadays there's a lot of people don't want to hire employees as much as they used to, right? Back in the day, it was just like everybody was, if you're in-house, you're an employee. Now it's like contract employee, this and that. So really read your contract and look at it and see if it works for you.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't have insurance because, we just contract for half a year. We're going to burn you out. Be careful of those studios because, like, ask people who've worked at those places. Like, I'm not going to name specific, studios, but there's, when you go there and they've, a lot of artists are coming and going, you need to ask people, hey, what's it like? And, sometimes the studio just wants to finish the job and hire you for 3 months and overtime you for the whole time, and then you're burned out.
Yeah.
But they don't really care because right now they're paying you. And then that's it, and it's a contract position. So you need to know what you want, right? If you want an in-house position that's an employee, then you know that, and then you look for that. And then when you see certain jobs that fit that criteria, it has a bigger cachet, as opposed to, working for a studio that just wants to get their thing out, and you have no more job after 4 months anyways. So really be careful of that.
Like you were saying about company culture, that's a specific thing that exists in places that you can also do your research on and find out. So it's on you when taking on a job to reach out and find people online who either do or have worked for these places, and really do your own diligence about what that company culture is that you're going to be joining. I think this idea of hiring slowly or taking on a job slowly is a really important one, to be meticulous there, because if you're going, especially in games, if you're going to spend 2 to 4 years of your life at a place, learn about it before you make that jump. And learn.
Yes, and they are all really different.
Right.
All the studios have a different vibe.
Mm-hmm.
They want different things. They give different things. So you have to be really aware. And so, to understand, first you need to not only play their games, because a lot of people think, well, I like Blizzard games, I like World of Warcraft, so I'm going to want to work there. Well, not necessarily. You like the games doesn't mean you want to work there.
Right.
You have to look at, does the culture support me as a person? Is that what I want? Is the art that I do what they want and what I want?
Mm-hmm.
Can I, like getting a job there is one thing, but is it what you want to do?
Right.
Just a lot of people like the name, like, hey, I'm working at a AAA, place, and it's awesome. But is it really? Not necessarily, because the indie place might be doing a game that looks fantastic. Like, okay, good example is I visit my friend Jeff Singali at Sony recently, and he's doing a game called Genie something. Concrete Genie, and it looks amazing. And I visited their team, and it's small. It's like 10 people. No, maybe like around 20 people, but like artist-wise, I don't think it was more than 10 people.
Wow.
The art was great. You could see that every artist could do or could flex their muscle.
Yeah.
And do what they were meant to do, and with a great art director. Like, that's, to me, is a perfect job. And they were employees. Sounds perfect.
Right. Right.
And they were part of Sony, so they have stability.
Right.
So that, so when you're out there looking for stuff like that, really keep things in mind. Like, because I just know that, and me included, you look at oh my God, Riot Games, and then all of a sudden you're already like, oh yeah, whatever you offer me, I'm going to go. Like, no. Take a step back, because if they're going to offer you anything, it's because you're good. And if you're good, there's more than one place you can be.
Fantastic advice. And I think not everything is going to work for everyone. It's what works for one person may not be the type of culture that you want. And so finding over time and figuring out and spending a lot of effort to understand yourself and your behavior and what kind of places and what things you value, I feel like are the guiding light for that. Merlin in the chat, what up, man? Flip Flop and Mad Art, thank you. Raja, hey Raja, thanks for hanging out with us. As always, got a question. When you were charging per day, and let's say if a piece took you 2 days, 16 hours, and after that the AD requested for some changes worth 3 hours, do you charge for that extra 3 hours? And if so, how do you calculate hour rate for extra hours? So if you did
talk about freelance, right?
Yeah. So if you charge,
so I mean, like, okay. So typically for me, when it comes to freelancing and charging like hours like that, it's really difficult. And then there's another person who says here, everybody says read your contracts. Can you negotiate your contracts? It all falls along the same lines, because first you say, okay. First thing, I don't charge by painting, right? I don't do that. Even for game studios, a lot of game studios say, hey, we need 3 paintings. What do you charge for that? Like, what's your per paint? There's no such thing. For me, it's always a day rate or hour rate. Okay? Yep. So that's it, So if let's say my day rate is, let's just say around 500 is the day rate. And I say, okay, this painting is going to take 3 days, but I can't be sure, in terms of, your feedback. And, I haven't worked with you before. I don't know, how this is going to go. So that's it. And you go, well, I estimate at 3 days, but it could go between 3 to 5 days.
Yeah.
So then when it's 3 days and they go, well, can you just change the angle, which is like a redo?
Right.
Then you go, okay, well, that's going to take another 2 days.
Right.
Okay, well, you agree, and then you move on. You keep working, and then they go, well, can you change more? Okay, because the more time, if you charge by time, then it's just time.
Yep.
It's not per project, right? And a lot of studios like to say, well, what do can you give us a lump sum, amount? And I'd be like, well, for that painting, it would take 3 to 5 days, and I charge at X per day.
So if you did,
I never ever go, well, that's going to be the lump. It just doesn't work like that for me.
If you had completed the thing at an even amount of days, and then they come back and say, hey, can you make this quick change? That takes you only 3 hours. You'd charge a full day for that.
No, I would. If it takes 3 hours, I'd charge half day.
There you go.
But I wouldn't charge less than that. And I think a lot of people want to do contract, and sometimes it's like you need to also know, like, okay, is this 3 hours? Sometimes I'll say, it's okay, I'll just do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course, legitimately, you always say, well, I charge for every second.
Right.
But sometimes if you feel like this, and this is just me, okay, like my opinion, but sometimes for me, if I really like working with this client and they just need a change that's going to take a couple hours, it's okay. Yeah. I'm not going to, redo a contract for 3 hours of pay, or I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. Yeah. The bigger problem is when you start charging very little, right? When you go, and this is, to everybody who's starting out in the field, if you think that charging little is going to get you to work with this person for a long term, you're actually putting yourself in a really bad situation. Charge what you're worth. And that, it's hard. But I mean, when somebody says, well, this studio called me and, they only pay, $800 a painting. That's supposed to cost like $3,000. I guess I should just get my foot in the door. It doesn't work like that, because they're always going to use you for that. And if more people will work, if they can get work done that's supposed to be $3,000 and they can get it done for $800, why do they ever pay the $3,000? Never. They're always going to just nickel and dime. So then it really puts the whole industry in a bad situation, because now you've got a lot of people who think, well, I can just get it for cheap. Mm-hmm. And so now nobody gets their rate. So get paid what you're worth, because, a lot of times you can't survive working $800 for a painting, and that painting takes 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Right. You're really screwed, So sometimes it might mean saying no. And that's a hard one. If someone offers you, like, hey, on spec, no pay, but I'll give you exposure. Like, you're just gonna have to say no sometimes. But I know a lot of people will be like, yeah, I got to do it, because right. I'm gonna get exposure, and just be really careful, of not getting what you're worth.
Bam. We got a bunch of awesome comments in here, so I'm just starting up at the top, so I'm a little bit behind where we're at. But we got Pregrim says hi, and the Alien says hey. Thanks for joining us. Merlin asks, are the deadlines for each concept piece in-house more intense than freelancing in a movie studio?
Say that again, sorry?
Deadlines in a game studio, are they more intense in-house than they would be in a movie studio?
That all depends. I think that when you're freelancing, you have a little bit of okay, so this is another benefit of freelancing is politics. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing I really like, is that I don't have to deal with it. Uh-huh. When you're at work, in-house, there's going to be politics. Uh-huh. There's just no way around that. There is in freelance too, but you're really much more shielded, because you only really just deal with the one person. Right,
because most of your communication is not there at the
right.
space.
So there's there's that part of it. Sorry, what was the question again?
Are deadlines more intense on games or movies?
Deadlines. So I haven't found that I actually found that in-house is harder. Because I've had to stay really late. We've had to do the whole 3-4 AM pushes, it can get really difficult. Freelance is kind of like, well, they give you a deadline, and you just do it, and you either agree that you can or you don't. But I mean, every game studio I've worked with have been very understanding, very fair in their. I actually think for film it's tighter.
Yeah.
For game studios, a lot of them will be like, "Here's your task, go do it," and then you just check back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really, like because I'm thinking, I can think of a lot of nightmare film jobs I've had in the recent years, but I can't think of any nightmare game jobs I've had.
Interesting.
They've all been very sort of chill, and kind of like, well, do some sketches and then bring it back, and then you bring it back, and they go, okay, we like that one, so can you develop it? There may be a little bit more cooks in the kitchen because the art director needs to talk to the game designer, and then the creative director, who's the overall guy, wants to see it. There's a lot of people in a game studio, whereas in film, it's just the producer designer.
Right. It's a really interesting point you bring up there to look at the industry as a whole, not just how we play into it. Because if you look at the movie industry today compared to the games industry today, the games industry in dollar and market share is exploding. There's so much
it's actually made more than film did.
It's in like astronomically more, especially over the last decade. And so in the games world, there's so much more blue ocean opportunity, where in the movie world there's a lot more establishment, so it's a lot harder to turn a profit, and where game studios are spending hundreds of millions of dollars developing a project, movie studios are trying to pull their budgets down. So it's a really interesting time actually to be looking at those two fields.
There's no such thing as as a foreign benefits or things like that, because a lot of films are going to London and stuff like that, because there's subsidies and stuff, but in games there really isn't. I think games is a great place to be because, also of its diverse nature. You could have a realistic game if that's what you're into. You could have a completely whimsical, cartoony game, that's what you're into. You could have fantasy. Your art can really just permeate anything. Like you can fit somewhere. Film, it's all kind of like similar in this kind of area, whereas games is like as wide as you can go. And I think for artists, games is a great place to be. Now, like Greg here says, like any tips on networking on the game biz as a remote freelancer. And I've actually gotten a lot of questions recently about not just in the game, but in film and in anything, when you're, how are you going to get known? Like how are you going to get to a point where, game studios can, the thing is, a lot of game studios actually look online now for their talent. Like, and I know ArtStation, they've looked there a lot. I've gotten contacted there. Most of my game gigs have, like half of them have been from ArtStation, half of it have been through just knowing people, right? So that's just going out and meeting people, being sociable, and like having a place where your work sits that everybody likes. I mean, ultimately, your work needs to be strong, but like if you have a good ArtStation profile, that's good. Post constantly, or at least frequently, but not bad stuff. Post good stuff frequently.
Yeah.
Which is harder to easier said than done, but that's what you got to do. And a lot of people, they show up with their portfolio and go, "Well, why am I not getting hired?" And I'm like, "Well, you're not getting hired because the quality of the work. Some is great, some is okay, some is questionable, and it's all there. Nobody knows what to think of it. So if you really want to get noticed, do really good work, post good work, and go and meet people. I mean, meet people online, meet people in real person. I think that it's not that hard to find somebody who might be, let's say, working for Riot, and go and have lunch with them and talk to them and ask them about the culture. Maybe you run into an art director, you show your work, and the next thing you know, you've got a job. That's what happened at Pixar for me. I mean, you just kind of, I didn't work there, but I got an offer. But I was there at the right time with my portfolio. Just so happened. So, it's just one of those things where if you want to get your work out there. Number one is to get it out there, and then number two is to start talking to people about your work. But more often than not, just having your work out there that's strong will get you noticed. And that's just the way it is. I mean, I don't know of any easier way. Yeah. But social media is a great place, to do that. Nowadays, you don't have to go out.
Yeah, and you can reach out on social media too. And I think it's important with the mentality. If you're reaching for someone for advice or something, bring them something of value in whatever way you can. At the very least, let me buy you a cup of coffee. But if you can, always bring them something as you reach out. Don't just reach out and tell someone your needs and ask them to figure it out for you.
I'll give you a good example here. So, one of my friends told me, okay, look, I got he wants to get into film. So he said, hey, look, I have a name, of this, one of my teachers gave me this contact, who's now a PD. And so he contacted that PD, and that PD said, you know what, I need to give back. So I'm going to talk to you. Come, we'll have a coffee. They met, and he got a good information and all that. But you have to be willing to sort of go out. First of all, if anybody who's learning, talk to your teachers. Your teachers might know other people. Be genuine, and like you said, go grab a coffee. Go email them. If you don't know them, email them. If you think they're really good, email them and say, hey, maybe I know you might be busy, but mind if I take you out for a coffee or, something, or lunch, but the truth is, if you come out and meet with that person for lunch, let's say they do meet you for lunch and they see you're working as good, 2 weeks later, you might be working with them.
Yep.
You never know, but it's worth reaching out. Like one of the guys that I was mentoring came from just some email.
Yep.
Like John Guzzi. I mean, he's just like, hey, I need some guy to help me with director study for my school. And I'm like, at that moment, I was like, oh, okay. And then the rest is history. He's been working already for 3-4 years in the industry now. But, you never know until you reach out. But when you reach out, be respectful. And I think good things will come to you. It's just that you have to really put yourself out there. You can't, nobody's just going to be knocking down your door.
Right.
Oh, the doorbell's ringing, jobs out there. No, you're going to have to go and do something about it.
Yeah, that doesn't happen for anyone, or at least not for a very long period of time. You always have to be putting yourself out there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I do a thing for the last 5 years that's been super valuable to me is I once a week take a meeting with someone who is not, that I'm not immediately trying to work with, but just someone I know or have met that I respect. And I just try to once a week go and have a coffee with them and learn more about what's of value to them and what they're trying to do. And oftentimes in that conversation, we find ways of things we can do together. And really,
I think that's awesome. And honestly, but I think a lot of times it's going to fall into this, how does that person, where are they at the moment of their lives? Because sometimes people email me and I'm on 4 gigs. I can't even email back. I can't even email my client back, much less somebody who wants to talk about art. So I'm like, I'm sorry, but right now I just can't do it.
A note for the chat. This is not an invitation to reach out to E-Man. This is an invitation. This is the space to ask E-Man your questions. But elsewhere, use technology and social media at your hands to reach out to other people. Don't bombard E-Man with a bunch of hey, I want to take you to coffees. That's not what this is for. This room is here for you to talk to him here. You know
what the truth is. You're going to talk to people, that you like and you want to have feedback on, and sometimes they're going to answer and sometimes they aren't. But you're going to find that more people are going to want to help than not. You can't know until you try. But the key is when I read these emails, there's one thing I look for, and it's, first of all, that it's not a mass email. That it's just a generic as hell. You want something that's sincere. Like somebody says, hey, I really like that you did that. Can we talk? Okay, then at least the person that you're asking feels like, okay, well, at least you're really talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I've gotten a lot of emails where you're like, okay, this was machine gun style. It's like, I know this is a form email here, but just be sincere. If you really like their work, talk to them. Tell them what you like about their work, so that maybe they can help you. And then let's see where things go. But don't take it personally if you don't get a response or if nothing happens. But you got to put what was that saying? You win 100% of the games
you miss 100% of the shots you don't
you don't take.
Yeah.
I was like, but if you don't try something, nothing will happen.
Yeah.
So it's up to you guys, what you want to try. But obviously, I'm doing these videos so that you can at least get some kind of information. Because what I have noticed is that a lot of people who think they want to get into the field don't really understand the field.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't understand, what the games are. So if you look at certain game studios, make sure they're within your style. It's something you want to do. If it's not, don't apply. Don't even think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not going to get in. Like, nobody's going to, if you're a super fantasy guy, who's going to, but you can't go to Triarch and want to do Call of Duty. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So really look at what they're about, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times those people get offended when you go to the interview and they go, do you even know what we do?
Yeah, right.
That happens.
I know.
That happens. And then I've talked to the recruiters and they go, how's that possible?
Yeah. Yeah.
You brought a fantasy portfolio, we're Triarch.
Right.
What? So, it's like going to Pixar, like, I know the best artists, like, that got denied from Pixar not because they're bad artists, but because they don't fit that style.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to really look at what you want to do. The game studio, yeah, I would have a list of game studios that fit my style. And then I would say, okay, you know what, that's my goal. And then I would look at the studio, the top artists there, and look at my work and see how it compares to their work.
Right.
And if it's getting close, that's when you go, yeah, I can submit. But if it's way far, at least you got a gauge,
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, I had none of this.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, the internet was just starting. Wait, okay, I'm not that old.
But, I mean, the internet, is not very old. 94, I think, was when it began. It's, and things like Instagram didn't come around until 2010.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just, there's so many ways, but ultimately nothing beats just doing kick-ass work.
Yeah.
And you can gauge your kick-ass work by looking at the other people who've done you go to our station, do a search, right? You want Blizzard games? Overwatch. Boom. Okay, that's the quality. Like, that guy's on Overwatch and he did this. Okay, my shit needs to look like that.
Right. We're short on time here, and we have so many things that we wanted to get through with this this one. What I think we'll just do is we'll do a part 2 of games coming up, because we've got so many great questions in the chat, and I really want to see if we can get through as many of these as we can. Thank you all for participating. Wander Nowhere says, are you allowed to talk about client work with other people in circles for feedback?
Well, I mean, that's a very touchy subject. I think and it's a good time to say, you have signed an NDA. I think any studio is going to make you sign an NDA, which means you do not disclose the work itself. So I would, it's okay to tell people you're working on the thing. It's okay to say, hey, look, I'm working with this such a studio. I wouldn't show the work. Obviously, I don't think that's advisable. But a lot of times when I ask for feedback, it's not necessarily on the pieces directly, but it's kind of like, hey, I think I need a really heroic pose, guys. And I'm running a block here. I'm thinking a jump could be like this. What do you guys think? Something a little bit more general.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just be careful. And never share or email out work that you want feedback on that's supposed to be confidential, things like that. I mean, that's just common sense.
Serious hot water for that. Another thank you for your question, Wander and Kaki asks, in games, do you find yourself working directly with game designers as well as art directors?
Yeah, I mean, there have been times, yes, that I have had Skype meetings with multiple game designers and art directors in the same call. And that happens, and you have to be open to it, and you have to understand where they're coming from, because game designers aren't artists, and artists aren't game designers. So you kind of have to come together. And game designers are their main. It's like film people coming together with script writers.
Right.
So you have to understand that they have their thing, and you respect each other, and try to understand what they need out of you. And then you can have a good conversation. But that has happened, not often.
Yeah, we saw that a ton when making our game Sleep Tight that we just put out on Nintendo, where Max was leading the creative and the art team, and Jed was our gameplay director. And the two of them grew up together, so they were able to work really well in song. But it was this process that had taken them so long to figure out, how do you bring gameplay and art together. And then Sleep Tight was our first real look at that. WC Studio says, thanks, great answer. White Winged Crow says, I really appreciate you telling us to go for what we truly want. Forrest Lamb says, very true. Each studio has a different culture. I passed a question here somewhere. I really want to make sure I got it. What are your thoughts, Daniel Warren, what are your thoughts about getting into the game industry in your 30s with an online self-taught education?
So I think that's another thing we were going to talk about in another post about learning and self-taught educations. But the question is what I think he's in his 30s. What I think about a self-taught education for the games field, kind of.
Yep.
So I first of all, being 30 means nothing. Zero. It means nothing. You could be 20 or you could be 60. I don't care what age you are. It means nothing. Because when you look at an online portfolio, guess what they see? They see the work. They don't see, oh, this guy's 30 and they learn by themselves. No, they don't see that. They see the work. So if it's good work, they could care less if you were 75 and you never, took a class a day in your life. They don't care.
Yeah.
Nobody cares but the work. So the only thing I can tell you guys is to strategize, to put your stuff out there. That's be smart, so that you're not putting everything in the kitchen sink. Your sketches from 10 years ago, just because you feel like you need to fill your feed. Put the good work there. If you have one kick-ass piece, you'll still get called. If you have 10 bad pieces and one kick-ass piece, you won't get called. And that's all. It's that simple. Like, I'm saying this from I had hired before, so I'm coming from that perspective, and I'm coming from the perspective of I've wanted to get hired before.
Yeah.
So both sides, and I'm telling you that, like, if you have one bad piece, that you're screwing yourself. Don't you be very, very hard on yourself when you look at what's online.
Miguel says, everyone says, read your contracts. Can you negotiate your contracts? Question mark.
Can you? Yes, of course, and you should. But I mean, to a certain limit. But everybody should have a sort of work for hire contract. If you're freelance, if you're doing an in-house gig, then make sure that you look it over and that you have the things that you want in there. Now, it's been a long time since I've had to negotiate an in-house gig, but everything is negotiable.
Yeah. White Winged Crow has got another one here. One thing I've been told by a teacher before was that rendering you can figure out over time, but creative ideas are what make people notice. To what extent would you say that's true? I know your advice in the past has been to get good.
So get good is a very, very sort of vague term, like get good. Good in terms of what, right? But I mean, what she's asking is basically, yes, design trumps everything, right?
Yeah.
Design is, design meaning lighting design, composition design, color design, right? It trumps everything. because it's the overlying structure of something, as opposed to I'm just going to render the crap out of this button. But the button is a very small part of this huge thing.
Right.
So what you need to do is make sure that huge thing is something that people want. First of all, is people want to see, right? A lot of people they're doing art that people, they could be doing art that people want to see, except sometimes they're not being aware of what's out there. They're not trying to say, okay, well, I'm really good at this, so I can present it in this way so that all these people can like it too.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you have to ask yourself, are you doing your own art as an artist, or are you trying to get a portfolio so you can get a job?
Yeah.
Like, what is it? If you want to be an artist, dude, do whatever you want. Like, because you need to express yourself. But if you want to get a job, then you need to do something that people want.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, it also is what you want, right? At least to some limit. But they're paying you, so it's got to be what they want.
Yeah.
So you got to do something that excites the people who are going to hire you.
Right.
It's that simple. And you can see by the people working there what excites them. It's like the roadmap is there.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got to say, well, do I like doing that kind of work? I do. Okay, well then do it. No, I hate it. Then don't do it. Then go look at some other studio. Oh, I really like that work.
Right.
Okay, well then do something like that.
A massive takeaway from this whole episode, I think, is finding what works for you. And that won't be what works for everyone. There's no special code that Eman could give you to do that. It's developing yourself and really thinking about the details of who you are and who you want to be as an artist and a professional.
Yeah, and just know that there's so many game studios that there is one that's going to fit you.
Yeah.
But just make sure that you're doing the best kind of work you can, and there will be a fit. I mean, I don't think there's any genre you couldn't find. Now, film is a different story,
Mm-hmm.
but games is definitely a lot wider. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we are right up against our time threshold here, Eman. I can't thank you enough for doing this with us. White Winged Crow says we're all collectively picking you up a cup of coffee right now, and I do want to just extend huge amounts of gratitude to you. And I know so many artists have reached out to us saying how awesome this show is and how much your advice means to them. So we can't thank you enough for coming on and spending this hour with us. And helping everyone figure out who and what kind of artist they want to be.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do it, and we'll pick it up again next episode. And yeah, for everybody who's listening, if you guys have questions or things like that, when I post out on the next episode, just if you have questions, also can list it out in the chat so that I can prepare for that question, maybe with examples. So because when you're live, it's harder to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But just saying, when I post out the links, just ask your questions.
And you're saying when you post the video on Facebook, in the comment section there, put your questions.
Yeah, just that's always available, or you can just directly email, Facebook me too, with questions, and I can just save it all up in a place where we can answer it next time.
That's awesome. If you are not already, follow Eman on Instagram and on Facebook, also on ArtStation if you want. You can always engage with us at KitBash3D. We are on all the Insta, Face, Tweet, social spots. Hit us up there. And in the meantime, you can engage with us on Discord. We will be back here next week with another awesome show. Thank you. You can always, if you want, give us a follow here on Twitch. We've got a lot of really cool plans coming up. Next month, we'll be back with another really great show with Eman. And that's all I got, Eman. You got any other last thoughts?
Only one last thought. Just a lot of, I've seen that people are posting about age.
Yep.
Just remember, age doesn't mean anything. Don't worry about the young guys. Just do the best work you can, because that age comes experience, and that's something younger people don't have. but younger people may have more energy. It's fine. It's all offset. It all plays in a very balanced role. So don't worry. Don't worry about extraneous circumstances. Worry about what you can do in terms of an artist. That's it.
Bam. On those notes, since we just put out our first game over here, Sleep Tight, I want to leave this audience with the trailer of the game.
Check it out.
Thank you, everyone, for kicking it with us this week, and we'll see y'all next time.
It was 8 minutes before bedtime. I was fresh out of ammo and the monsters were closing in. I needed that last power-up. Some nights, you just gotta be quick.
There it is. That is our game, Sleep Tight, and you can pick that up on Switch and Steam anytime you like. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see y'all real soon.